Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
I didn't mean to overhear them. I was in the kitchen, making a quick cup of tea, when I caught the tail end of my parents' conversation in the living room. $50,000, my mom said, her voice low but filled with urgency. We didn't have a choice, Robert. Derek would have been ruined without it. 50,000, my dad replied, sounding exasperated. We've already done enough. How much more does he expect us to cover? My hand froze mid-pour, the hot water splashing onto the counter. $50,000? What were they even talking about? I didn't want to eavesdrop, but something about the tone of their voices made me stay. Robert, it's his divorce, Mom continued, her tone softening. You know how messy these things can get. And Derek, he's not like Lisa. He's not strong enough to handle this on his own. That last line was a punch to the gut. I set the kettle down, my heart pounding. Derek's divorce? My brother, the golden child who'd been married for less than 3 years before things fell apart, had gotten himself into another mess, and now my parents were bailing him out? The wedding binder on the kitchen table suddenly felt heavier than ever. For the past year, I'd been meticulously planning every detail of my wedding to Greg, my fiancé. The venue, the flowers, the dress. It was all coming together, piece by piece, on a shoestring budget. When I'd first approached my parents about helping out with the wedding, they'd been clear. We just can't afford it right now, Dad had said, shaking his head. You're an adult, Lisa. You need to take care of this on your own. And I had. I'd worked overtime, sold old furniture, and even picked up freelance graphic design gigs to make it work. Greg's parents had pitched in what they could, but most of the burden had fallen on us. I'd accepted it, reluctantly, because I thought my parents genuinely couldn't afford to help. But now, standing there in the kitchen, listening to them casually discuss shelling out $50,000 for Derek's divorce settlement, my stomach turned. I didn't even realize I was gripping the countertop until my fingers started to ache. Lisa, Mom's voice snapped me out of my daze. I turned to see her standing in the doorway, a faint look of surprise on her face. How long have you been standing there? Long enough, I said, my voice tighter than I intended. She hesitated, glancing toward the living room where Dad was still sitting. Is something wrong? Wrong? I repeated, letting out a bitter laugh. Yeah, something's wrong, Mom. Did I just hear you say you spent $50,000 on Derek's divorce? Her expression shifted, a mix of guilt and defensiveness. Lisa, it's not what you think. Oh, really? I cut her off, stepping closer. Because what I think is that you told me you couldn't afford to help with my wedding. But somehow you had 50 grand lying around for Derek? Mom sighed, crossing her arms. It's not the same thing. That's what you're going with? I said, my voice rising. It's not the same thing? Do you have any idea how much I've been struggling to make this wedding happen? How many nights I've stayed up worrying about money while you've been writing checks to bail Derek out of his mess? Lower your voice, she said sharply, glancing toward the living room. Your father doesn't need this right now. Oh, I'm sorry, I snapped. I didn't realize my anger was such an inconvenience for you. Mom's face hardened. Lisa, this isn't about you. Derek's going through a very difficult time. His divorce has been messy, and if we hadn't stepped in, he could have lost everything. And I'm not going through a difficult time? I shot back. This is supposed to be one of the happiest times of my life, but instead, I'm constantly stressed about how I'm going to pay for everything. And you knew that. You knew, and you chose to ignore it because, what? Derek's problems are more important than my happiness? Lisa, please, she said, her tone softening again. We're trying our best. We didn't plan for this to happen. You didn't plan for this to happen, I repeated, shaking my head. But you planned to say no to me the second I asked for help, didn't you? She opened her mouth to respond, but I didn't give her the chance. I'm done, Mom, I said, grabbing my purse from the counter. You've made it perfectly clear where I stand in this family. I hope Derek's grateful, because I sure as hell won't forget this. As I walked out of the kitchen, my hands trembling with anger, one thought kept running through my mind. I needed answers. Real answers. And if my mom wasn't going to give them to me, I'd have to confront my dad next. Have you ever felt like your family doesn't see your worth? Would you fight for their respect, or would you walk away? Let me know, because I wasn't sure what I was going to do next. Dinner that night was tense before it even began. The usual chatter about Dad's golf game or Mom's plans for her garden were replaced by an awkward silence. I sat at the table, staring at my plate, my anger simmering just below the surface. Mom brought over a bowl of mashed potatoes and placed it in the center of the table, her movements stiff and deliberate. Lisa, could you pass the salad? She asked, her tone strained, like nothing had happened earlier. I ignored her question. When were you going to tell me? Dad, who had just sat down, looked up in confusion. Tell you what. I fixed my gaze on him, my voice sharper than I intended. About Derek. About how you spent $50,000 on his divorce settlement, while telling me you couldn't afford to help with my wedding. The clatter of Mom's serving spoon hitting the counter was the only sound in the room. Dad's face hardened, and for a moment, no one spoke. Lisa, Mom started, her voice low. This isn't the time. No, I interrupted, my hands gripping the edge of the table. This is exactly the time. I've been bending over backward to plan this wedding on my own, and you two just threw 50 grand at Derek like it's nothing. I deserve an explanation. Dad set his fork down carefully, his jaw tightening. It's not as simple as you think, he said finally. Then explain it to me, I said, my tone laced with sarcasm. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks pretty simple. You didn't help me because you didn't want to. That's not fair, Mom said, her voice rising slightly. Fair? I laughed bitterly. What part of this is fair, Mom? Derek makes one bad decision after another, and you bail him out every single time. Meanwhile, I'm working overtime, stretching every dollar to pay for a wedding you said you couldn't afford to help with. Dad's eyes narrowed. Derek needed help. Lisa, you don't understand what he's been through. Really? I shot back. Because it seems to me that Derek's problems are always more important than anyone else's. Mom sat down, folding her hands in front of her. Lisa, we're not saying your wedding isn't important, but Derek was in a crisis. He could have lost everything. His house, his savings. We couldn't just let him drown. And what about me? I said, my voice trembling. I've been drowning too. Do you have any idea how hard this has been for me? Trying to plan a wedding with practically no financial support from my own parents. Mom's face softened, but she didn't respond. That's different, Dad said firmly. You're strong, Lisa. You've always been strong. Derek isn't. He needed us. His words hit me like a slap to the face. I stared at him, my throat tightening with emotion. So that's it? Because I'm strong, I don't matter? You think I don't need help just because I've learned to fend for myself? Dad looked away, avoiding my gaze. I leaned back in my chair, letting out a shaky breath. Do you even realize what you're saying? You're punishing me for being independent while rewarding Derek for being a screw-up. Do you know how exhausting it is to feel like I have to be perfect all the time just to get a fraction of the attention you give him? Lisa, that's not what we're doing, Mom said quietly. Then what are you doing? I demanded. Because all I see is you two bending over backward for Derek while leaving me to figure everything out on my own. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Dad spoke, his tone defensive. You've always been the responsible one, Lisa. Derek's had a harder time finding his way. We're just trying to help him, and I don't deserve help? I asked, my voice cracking. Of course you do, Mom said, reaching for my hand. But this was an emergency. I pulled my hand away, my frustration boiling over. It's always an emergency with Derek. He gets himself into a mess, and you swoop in to save him, no matter the cost. When does it stop? Neither of them had an answer. I pushed back my chair and stood up, my heart pounding. You know what? I don't even care anymore. Keep coddling Derek. Pay for his mistakes. Just don't expect me to keep pretending like it doesn't hurt. Lisa, Mom said, her voice trembling, please don't do this. We love you. Funny way of showing it, I said, grabbing my purse. I'll see myself out. As I walked out the door, I felt a mix of anger, sadness, and something else I couldn't quite name. I needed answers, and if my parents weren't going to give them to me, I'd get them from Derek himself. What do you do when the people you've always trusted let you down? Would you confront them, or would you walk away? Let me know, because I wasn't done fighting for the truth. Derek's apartment was exactly what I expected. Minimal effort, maximum convenience. A half-empty pizza box sat on the coffee table, and a pile of unfolded laundry was shoved into the corner. It was as if his entire life was a reflection of how he handled his responsibilities, sloppy and thoughtless. When he opened the door and saw me, he didn't even try to hide his surprise. Lisa, what are you doing here? We need to talk, I said, brushing past him into the living room without waiting for an invitation. He closed the door and followed me, his brow furrowed. What's going on? I turned to face him, my arms crossed. I know about the money, Derek. The 50,000 mom and dad gave you for your divorce. His expression shifted instantly, moving from confusion to defensiveness. Oh, that. Yes, that. I snapped. Care to explain why our parents can magically find 50 grand for you, but couldn't spare a dime to help me with my wedding? Derek let out a long sigh and flopped onto the couch, rubbing his temples. Lisa, this isn't what you think. Then explain it to me, I said, my voice tight. Because from where I'm standing, it looks a hell of a lot like favoritism. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Look, I get why you're upset, okay? But you don't understand what it's like to go through a divorce. It's messy, it's expensive, and it's not something I could have handled on my own. Oh, give me a break. I shot back, throwing my hands up. You think you're the only person in this family who's ever faced a challenge? I've been bending over backward my entire life to keep things together, while you've been screwing around and expecting everyone else to clean up your messes. That's not fair, he said, his voice rising. You don't know what I've been through, Lisa. Do you have any idea how humiliating it is to watch your marriage fall apart? To have your life completely derailed? No, I don't, I admitted. But I do know what it feels like to be ignored. To sacrifice everything for this family and get nothing in return. Derek's eyes narrowed. Sacrifice? What are you even talking about? You've always been the golden child, Lisa. Straight-A student, stable job, perfect fiancé. You've got everything, and you still find a way to complain. I let out a bitter laugh. The golden child? Are you serious? Derek, I've had to fight for every scrap of attention from mom and dad while you've been handed everything on a silver platter. Do you know how exhausting it is to always be the responsible one? The one who has to pick up the slack because you can't get your act together? That's not my fault. He shot back, his voice cracking with frustration. Maybe not, I said, stepping closer. But it's not my responsibility either. And yet, here I am, working overtime to pay for my wedding because mom and dad can't afford it, while you sit here in your bachelor pad, living off their generosity. Derek stood up, his face red with anger. You don't get it, Lisa. You've never been in a situation where you've needed help. You've always had everything figured out, so don't stand there and act like you're better than me just because I needed a little support. A little support? I repeated, my voice trembling. They gave you $50,000, Derek. Do you have any idea what I could have done with that kind of money? Do you even care how much they've hurt me by putting you first? He opened his mouth to respond but stopped, his jaw tightening. For a moment, I thought he might apologize. But instead, he shook his head and said, You're being selfish, Lisa. This isn't just about you. Families help each other out when times get tough. That's what mom and dad did for me. Families help each other? I said, laughing bitterly. When have you ever helped me, Derek? When have you ever done anything but take and expect me to clean up the mess? That's not fair, he muttered, looking away. No, it's not, I agreed, my voice cold. But that's the reality, isn't it? You make bad choices, and the rest of us pay the price. The room fell silent, the weight of my words hanging between us. Derek looked at me, his expression a mix of guilt and anger. But instead of apologizing, he simply said, If you have a problem, take it up with mom and dad. They're the ones who made the decision. I stared at him, my chest tightening with a mix of anger and disappointment. Oh, trust me, I said quietly. I will. Without another word, I turned and walked out, slamming the door behind me. As I drove home, my mind raced with everything I wanted to say to my parents. I'd confronted Derek, but it wasn't enough. The real betrayal had come from them, and I wasn't going to let it go unanswered. How do you make someone see the damage they've caused when they refuse to admit they're wrong? Would you keep fighting, or would you let it go? Let me know, because I wasn't ready to give up yet. Driving home after my argument with Derek, my mind replayed every word he'd said. You've always had everything figured out. You're being selfish. Families help each other. Each sentence felt like a jab, not because it was true, but because it revealed just how deeply our family dynamic had been skewed for years. Derek's refusal to take responsibility wasn't surprising. What stung was his ability to dismiss my pain so easily, to act as if my struggles didn't matter simply because I wasn't drowning in chaos the way he always seemed to be. As the quiet hum of the car filled the space around me, I couldn't help but think back to when this all began. Growing up, Derek had always been the golden child. He wasn't particularly talented or hardworking, but he had a knack for charming people, especially our parents. Where I was expected to make my own way, Derek was carried on the wings of their unconditional support. I remembered one summer in middle school when I begged my parents to let me join a science camp. It was expensive, sure, but I'd worked so hard on my application essay and had even earned a partial scholarship. I don't think we can afford it, Lisa, Mom had said, her tone apologetic but firm. Maybe next year. The next week, they bought Derek a brand new dirt bike. It's not the same thing, Dad had said when I pointed out the glaring inconsistency. The bike was a reward for Derek's hard work this year. Hard work? Derek had barely passed 7th grade, while I'd earned straight A's and a science fair trophy. But in their eyes, he needed the encouragement, and I was already self-motivated. That pattern never changed. In high school, Derek wrecked his first car within 6 months of getting it. He was texting while driving, something he swore he never did. But Dad still went out the next weekend and bought him a replacement. Meanwhile, I worked weekends at the local coffee shop to save up for my own car. When I finally had enough to buy an old, beat-up sedan, Dad made a big show of matching my contribution with $200, as if it made up for the thousands he'd spent on Derek. It builds character, Mom had said when I complained. You'll appreciate it more because you worked for it. She wasn't wrong. I did appreciate it. But the lesson wasn't the one they thought I'd learn. What stuck with me was this. If I wanted anything in life, I couldn't rely on them. I parked the car in front of my apartment and sat there for a moment, staring at the dashboard. The memories swirled around me, each one sharpening the edges of my frustration. There was the time Derek skipped half his senior year, but still got a fully funded graduation party because he needed encouragement. The time he dropped out of college after one semester, only for Dad to offer him a job at his construction company to help him find his footing. And then there was the Christmas I got a set of towels and Derek got a $300 smartwatch. The favoritism wasn't just financial, it was emotional, too. When Derek failed, they coddled him. When I succeeded, they barely acknowledged it. As I climbed the stairs to my apartment, I thought about how hard I'd worked to prove myself over the years. Every honor roll certificate, every promotion at work, every look what I accomplished phone call. It was all an attempt to get them to see me, to value me. But it was never enough. And now, standing in my kitchen with my wedding binder staring back at me, I wondered if it ever would be. Greg walked in a few minutes later, his tie loosened and his face lighting up when he saw me. Hey, babe, he said, kissing my forehead. How was your day? Exhausting, I admitted. Sitting down at the table, he glanced at the binder and frowned. Wedding stuff still stressing you out? It's not the wedding, I said, shaking my head. It's my parents. I told him everything, about the money, the conversation with Derek, the years of feeling like I was second best. Greg listened, his hand resting on mine as I talked. Lisa, he said softly when I finished, you can't keep setting yourself on fire to keep them warm. At some point, you have to ask yourself if it's even worth it. His words hit me hard, but he was right. That night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I thought about what Greg had said. I'd spent my whole life chasing my parents' approval, hoping they'd see me the way they saw Derek. But what if that never happened? What if the best thing I could do, for myself, for my sanity, was to let go? The thought terrified me, but it also brought a strange sense of peace. What would you do if the people you loved the most never truly saw your worth? Would you keep fighting for their approval, or would you walk away to protect your happiness? Let me know, because for me, the answer was becoming clearer. The morning after my confrontation with Derek, I woke up with a pounding headache, not from lack of sleep, but from the emotional toll of reliving years of frustration and resentment. As much as I wanted to brush it off and move forward, the weight of everything hung over me like a cloud I couldn't escape. Greg was already up, standing by the kitchen counter with a cup of coffee in his hand. He glanced over when I walked in, giving me a warm smile. Hey, sleepyhead, he said. Want me to make you a cup? Sure, I replied, sliding into a chair at the table. He poured me a mug and set it in front of me before sitting across from me. You've been pretty quiet the last few days, he said gently. What's going on? I hesitated, staring down at the swirling steam rising from my cup. Greg and I had talked about my parents before, but I hadn't told him the full extent of what had been happening. Now, as I sat there, the words felt heavy in my throat. It's my parents, I finally said, my voice quieter than I intended. And Derek. Greg raised an eyebrow. What did he do now? I told him everything. The $50,000, the excuses my parents had made, the years of favoritism that had led to this moment. As I spoke, Greg's expression shifted from concern to disbelief to anger. Let me get this straight, he said when I finished. They told you they couldn't help with our wedding but found $50,000 to bail Derek out of his divorce? I nodded, feeling the familiar sting of frustration welling up again. Greg shook his head, leaning back in his chair. That's unbelievable. I mean, I know they've always favored him, but this is on another level. I just don't get it, I said, my voice trembling. I've done everything right. I've worked hard, stayed responsible, tried to make them proud, and it still doesn't matter. No matter what I do, Derek always comes first. Greg reached across the table, taking my hand in his. Lisa, that's not on you. That's on them. You've done everything you can, and if they can't see that, it's their loss, not yours. I nodded, though his words didn't erase the ache in my chest. We'll figure this out, Greg continued. But maybe we need to think about scaling back the wedding plans. I don't want us to go into debt over this, especially if your parents aren't going to help. His suggestion made sense, but it also stirred a sense of injustice deep within me. Why is it always me who has to make the sacrifices? I said, my voice rising slightly. Derek screws up, and they bend over backward to fix it. Meanwhile, I'm expected to just accept it and keep cutting back. It's not fair, Greg. It's just not fair. Greg's eyes softened. You're right. It's not fair. But you can't control what they do. You can only control how you respond. And at the end of the day, this wedding is about us, not them. We don't need their money to make it special. I knew he was right, but it still felt like a bitter pill to swallow. Later that day, I met up with my best friend, Sarah, at our favorite cafe. The moment I sat down, she gave me a look that said she knew something was wrong. Spill it, she said, pushing a latte toward me. I laughed softly, shaking my head. Is it that obvious? Lisa, I've known you since we were 10. You've got angry but trying to hide it, written all over your face. What happened? I told her everything, just as I had with Greg. Unlike Greg, though, Sarah didn't hold back her outrage. That's insane, she said, her voice loud enough to draw a few glances from nearby tables. 50 grand for Derek? Are you kidding me? Yeah, I said bitterly. And not a penny for me. Sarah shook her head, leaning forward. You deserve so much better than this, Lisa. You've spent your whole life trying to prove yourself to them, and for what? They've made it clear where their priorities lie. Her words hit me harder than I expected. You're right, I said quietly. I keep hoping they'll change, but they won't. And I can't keep letting their choices define my worth. Sarah smiled, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. Exactly. You've worked too hard to let them drag you down. Focus on what makes you happy, on the people who actually support you. Her words stayed with me long after I left the cafe. That evening, I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. I'd been holding on to so much anger, so much pain, and it was eating me alive. I needed to let it out, and I needed my parents to understand how deeply they'd hurt me. I started typing, pouring everything I felt into a letter. Dear Mom and Dad, I've always tried to make you proud. I've worked hard, stayed responsible, and done everything I could to be the kind of daughter you could rely on. But lately, I've realized that no matter how much I give, it's never enough. Not compared to Derek. When I found out about the $50,000 you gave him, I wasn't just angry, I was heartbroken. You've always told me that family comes first, but in moments like this, it's clear that only applies to him. I'm not writing this to make you feel guilty or to demand anything from you. I'm writing this because I need you to understand how much this has hurt me. For once, I need you to see me, not as the daughter who has it all figured out, but as someone who's struggling too. I love you, but I can't keep sacrificing my happiness for a family that doesn't value me. It's time for me to focus on my own future, on the people who truly support me. As I read over the letter, tears blurred my vision. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And for the first time, I felt like I was finally taking control of my own story. How do you move forward when the people you love the most refuse to see your worth? Would you try to make them understand? Or would you walk away? Let me know, because for me, the choice was becoming clearer every day. The envelope felt heavier in my hand than it should have. My fingers traced the edges as I sat in my car, parked in front of my parents' house. The letter inside contained every ounce of frustration, sadness, and disappointment I'd been carrying for years. I wasn't sure what I hoped to achieve by delivering it. A part of me wanted an apology. Another part wanted them to finally see the damage they'd done. But mostly, I just needed to say my piece. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out of the car and walked up the driveway. Mom answered the door, her expression lighting up when she saw me. Lisa, what a nice surprise, she said, stepping aside to let me in. It's not exactly a social visit, I said, my tone serious. Is Dad here? I need to talk to both of you. Her smile faltered, but she nodded. He's in the living room. I followed her inside, clutching the envelope like it was a lifeline. Dad was sitting in his recliner, flipping through the channels on the TV. He looked up as I walked in, raising an eyebrow. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Not really," I said, my voice steady. "I need to talk to you. Both of you." Mom sat down on the couch, her posture stiff. "What's this about?" Wordlessly, I handed her the envelope. She took it hesitantly, glancing at Dad before opening it. As she read the letter, her face shifted through a range of emotions: confusion, guilt, and finally, sadness. When she passed it to Dad, he read it in silence, his jaw tightening as he went. When he finished, he set the letter down on the coffee table and leaned back in his chair, letting out a long sigh. "Lisa," he began, his tone cautious, "we had no idea you felt this way. How could you not?" I said, my voice trembling. "I've spent my entire life watching you put Derek first. Every time he screws up, you're there to fix it. Every time I succeed, it's like you barely notice. And now, with the wedding and the $50,000 for his divorce, it's just too much." Mom's eyes filled with tears. "We didn't mean to hurt you, Lisa. We were just trying to protect Derek. He's always needed us more than you have." "Why?" I demanded, my frustration spilling out. "Why does he need you more? Because he can't take responsibility for his own life? Because he knows you'll always bail him out?" "That's not fair," Dad said, his voice rising slightly. "You don't know what it's like to see your child struggle the way Derek has. You've always been so strong, so capable. We didn't think you needed us the same way." "Of course I needed you," I shouted, tears streaming down my face. "Just because I'm strong doesn't mean I don't need support. Do you know how lonely it's been? Feeling like I'm not as important as Derek? Like no matter what I do, it'll never measure up." Mom reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "We didn't realize you felt this way," she said softly. "We thought we were doing what was best for the family." "No," I said firmly. "You did what was best for Derek. And maybe you didn't realize it at the time, but your choices have shown me over and over again that I'm not a priority to you." "That's not true," Dad said quickly. "We love you, Lisa. We're proud of you." "Then show it," I said, my voice cracking. "Stop making excuses for why Derek's needs are always more important than mine. Stop treating me like I'm invincible just because I've learned to take care of myself. I deserve better than this. I deserve parents who see me." The room fell silent, the weight of my words hanging in the air. Mom wiped her eyes, her expression a mix of guilt and sorrow. Dad looked down at his hands, his face unreadable. "We're sorry, Lisa," Mom said finally, her voice trembling. "We never wanted you to feel this way." "I believe you," I said, my tone softening. "But sorry isn't enough. I need things to change. I can't keep putting myself last just to keep this family together. If you can't see that, then maybe I need to take a step back." Dad looked up sharply. "You don't mean that." "I do," I said, standing up. "I love you both, but I can't keep sacrificing my happiness for people who don't value me. If you want me to be a part of this family, something has to change." As I walked to the door, Mom called after me. "Lisa, wait. Please, we can fix this." I turned to face her, my heart aching. "I hope so, Mom. I really do. But it's up to you now. What do you do when the people who are supposed to love you the most don't see your worth? Would you give them a chance to change, or would you walk away? Let me know, because for me, this felt like the beginning of something new, but also the end of something I'd held on to for far too long." The morning of my wedding was a blur of activity and emotions. Sarah showed up early with coffee and pastries, determined to keep me calm. "Today's about you," she said, setting up shop at my dining table. "Not them. Not Derek. Just you and Greg." She was right, of course. But as I sat in my robe while the stylist curled my hair, I couldn't stop thinking about my parents. Would they even come? Mom had left me a voicemail a week ago saying they wouldn't miss it for the world. But after everything that had happened, I wasn't sure how much weight to give her words. The doorbell rang, and Sarah jumped up to answer it. Moments later, Greg walked in, grinning ear to ear. "Looking beautiful already," he teased, leaning down to kiss my forehead. "Not supposed to see the bride before the ceremony, remember?" I said, smiling despite myself. "Eh, I'll risk it," he said. "I just wanted to check on you. Everything okay?" I nodded, though my heart felt heavy. "I'm fine. Just trying not to overthink." "Good," he said, taking my hand. "Because today's about us. Nothing else matters." By the time I arrived at the venue, The butterflies in my stomach had turned into a full-blown storm. The small garden where the ceremony was set to take place was breathtaking. White roses wrapped around the trellises, soft music playing in the background, and rows of chairs filled with people who had come to celebrate us. As Sarah helped me adjust my veil, I scanned the crowd. My parents were there, sitting stiffly near the front. Dad's face was unreadable, but Mom's eyes darted nervously between the guests and me, as if she were waiting for some kind of sign. "They're here," Sarah said softly, following my gaze. "I know," I replied, my throat tightening. "Focus on Greg," she reminded me, squeezing my hand. "They're just guests today. The real family is the one you're building with him." Her words grounded me, and as the music swelled, I took my first steps down the aisle. The ceremony was perfect. Greg's vows made me laugh and cry in equal measure, and when he slid the ring onto my finger, all the tension melted away. For the first time in weeks, I felt truly happy. The reception, however, was another story. The banquet hall buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses as guests enjoyed their meals. I tried to focus on the warmth of the moment, the hugs from friends, the congratulations from Greg's family, but every time I glanced at my parents' table, the knot in my stomach tightened. Mom smiled weakly whenever our eyes met, while Dad avoided looking at me altogether. Derek, of course, wasn't there. He'd sent a text that morning saying he couldn't make it due to some last-minute excuse. I wasn't surprised, but it still stung. Greg, ever the diplomat, leaned over and whispered, "Do you want me to say something to them?" "No," I said quickly. "Let's just get through the night." The toast started after dessert, with Sarah kicking things off. "Lisa has always been the strongest person I know," she began, raising her glass. "She's the kind of person who lifts everyone around her, even when she's carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. And Greg? Well, let's just say she finally found someone strong enough to share that weight." The crowd erupted into laughter and applause, and I wiped away a tear as Sarah winked at me. Then it was Dad's turn. He stood up slowly, adjusting his tie before picking up the microphone. The room quieted, and I felt my chest tighten. "Lisa," he began, his voice steady but strained. "I'll admit, I didn't know what to say when I sat down to write this. Watching your little girl grow up and start a life of her own, it's not easy for a father." His eyes met mine briefly before darting away. "I know I haven't always gotten things right," he continued, his voice wavering slightly. "And I know there have been times when you felt like we weren't there for you the way we should have been. For that, I'm sorry." A murmur rippled through the crowd, and I felt the weight of everyone's eyes on me. "But," he added, his tone softening, "I want you to know how proud we are of you. You've built a life that anyone would admire, and today is proof of the incredible woman you've become." He raised his glass. "To Lisa and Greg, may your life together be as beautiful as this day." The applause that followed felt muted, at least to me. Dad's words had been carefully chosen, enough to acknowledge their mistakes, but not enough to fully address the years of hurt. As the night went on, I found myself replaying his toast in my mind, wondering if it had been genuine or just for show. Later, as Greg and I danced under the string lights, he leaned in and whispered, "You okay?" I nodded, resting my head on his shoulder. "I think so. For now, that's enough. Can a single apology erase years of pain? Would you accept it and move forward, or would you need more? Let me know, because for me, the answers still weren't clear." Months after the wedding, life had finally settled into a rhythm. Greg and I had moved into a cozy townhouse on the edge of the city, complete with a tiny backyard where we planned to plant a garden in the spring. The chaos of planning a wedding, balancing work, and dealing with my family had passed, leaving behind a quiet kind of clarity. In many ways, I felt lighter. For the first time in years, I wasn't bending over backward to meet someone else's expectations. My life was my own, and the love and support I'd received from Greg, Sarah, and others during the wedding reminded me that family isn't always defined by blood. Still, the distance between my parents and me lingered like a faint shadow. We'd spoken a few times since the wedding, mostly polite exchanges when they called to check in. Mom always asked how Greg was adjusting to married life, and Dad would occasionally mention some small achievement of mine, as if he were testing the waters of normalcy. But the deeper conversations never came. I thought back to Dad's wedding toast, his half-apology disguised as a compliment. While I appreciated the gesture, it hadn't been enough to fully mend the wounds. The favoritism, the years of being overlooked, the $50,000 betrayal, it all remained unspoken, like a wall neither of us knew how to climb. One afternoon, as I sifted through a pile of mail, A handwritten envelope caught my eye. The return address was my parents' house, and the familiar cursive was unmistakably Mom's. Curious but cautious, I opened it and unfolded the letter. Dear Lisa, I've started this letter a dozen times, unsure of how to say what I need to say. The truth is, I don't know if words will ever be enough, but I have to try. When you gave us that letter before your wedding, it was a wake-up call. Your dad and I read it over and over, and it made us realize how much we'd hurt you, even if we didn't mean to. I've spent the past few months thinking about all the ways we failed to support you, how often we leaned on your strength without recognizing the burden it placed on you. You've always been so capable, Lisa, and I think we mistook that for invincibility. We thought that because you didn't need us in the same way Derek did, it meant you didn't need us at all. That was wrong. We should have been there for you, not just with words, but with actions. I won't make excuses for our choices, but I want you to know that we see you now. We see the incredible woman you've become, not because of us, but in spite of the ways we let you down. And while I know we can't change the past, I hope we can work toward rebuilding what we've broken. You deserve all the happiness in the world, and I hope you know how much we love you. Love, Mom. Tears blurred my vision as I read the letter again and again, each word sinking deeper into my heart. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was honest. For so long, I'd wanted acknowledgement, not just for the hurt, but for the effort I'd poured into proving myself to them. Mom's letter felt like a step in that direction. That evening, I showed the letter to Greg. What do you think? I asked, my voice uncertain. He took a moment to read it, then handed it back to me. I think it's a good start, he said. But it's up to you to decide if it's enough. That was the question, wasn't it? Could I rebuild trust with my parents after everything? Over the next few weeks, I found myself replaying moments from my childhood, my wedding, and everything in between. The memories weren't all bad. There were trips to the beach, late-night baking sessions with Mom, and afternoons helping Dad fix things around the house. But the good memories were always tinged with a bittersweet edge, reminders of the favoritism and unspoken rules that had shaped my place in the family. I decided to call Mom one evening, unsure of what I would say, but knowing I needed to start somewhere. When she picked up, her voice was hesitant but hopeful. Lisa? Hi, Mom, I said, my chest tightening. I got your letter. Oh, she said softly. What did you think? I paused, choosing my words carefully. I think I appreciate it, and I think I want to try. But it's going to take time. Her voice cracked with emotion. That's all I could ask for. The conversation didn't solve everything, but it was a step forward. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were finally starting to see each other. Trust is fragile, especially when it's been broken by the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally. Rebuilding it takes time, effort, and a willingness to face the pain head-on. What about you? Can family bonds survive betrayal, or are some wounds too deep to heal? Let me know, because for me, the answer is still unfolding.